right, so today we are in Are You Covenanted, part 26. Part 26. We're going to continue here in Proverbs chapter 4. Now let's remember that what we're looking at here and paying attention to is the connection between wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and how those three things relate to our covenant keeping. Of course, if we're looking at wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, doing it in the book of Proverbs is a great place to go. We got through chapter 4, verses 1 through 15 previously. Now, where we left off, we were talking about not having our steps hindered and having discipline. That's in verse 12 and 13, and to not walk in the way of evildoers. Now, again, I want to kind of reset the idea that what we're talking about here with those that are wrong or evildoers or doing violence, we're going to read about in verse 17, that this is not necessarily talking about the things you would automatically connect to those words. An evildoer, scripturally, is anyone who is doing that which goes against what Yahweh had intended. So let's not limit it to thinking, well, he's not talking about my friends or this or that or whoever. He's not talking about people I know because I don't know anybody doing evil. Oh, sure, they eat pork and don't keep Sabbath and blah, 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 but they're not doing evil. Well, it's depending on your definition of evil, okay? Now, we shouldn't look at them as horrible, awful human beings because they've not yet had their eyes open or ears open, etc. But understand the definition he's using when he talks about, in verse 14, do not enter the path of the wrong and do not walk in the way of evildoers. He's talking about those that are not submitted to his commandments, his authority, his righteous right rulings, etc. That's what he's trying to communicate here. And as we go forward into verse 15, he said, avoid it, do not pass by it, turn away from it and pass on. And now we go into verse 16, for they do not sleep unless they have done evil, and their sleep is taken away unless they make someone fall. So in other words, it's not talking about literal sleep here. It's talking about that there's a disturbance in their peace. They can't rest unless they're just doing things they should not be doing. It seems to be that kind of focus. It takes up their time. It gives them a restlessness. Their rest or their peace, their sleep is taken away unless they make someone fall. So I think what we may be able to get out of verse 16, and this is a big warning to all of you, what if it's talking about those who are in the body, supposed to know better? Remember, who's primarily the audience that's being written to here? The people that should be in covenant, the people that should be in the body, the children of Abraham, the children of Israel. So he's saying, look, don't hang out with those who their peace is disturbed. I'm not talking about like having your peace disturbed when you first come in, but I mean they walk around with their peace disturbed and they're agitated and without sleep unless they get people to come over to their way of thinking. So their way of thinking, though, is going to make someone fall. That's the warning. So you have to be careful about you going into the place. Listen carefully. You got to be careful about you going into the place where you are trying to convince others to follow your position because you are not necessarily, but may be in this category. I'm not trying to accuse that everybody that tries to convince anybody of something is doing this. But you don't know what you don't know. So be really careful about trying to convince people to follow your position. This is why there's a double judgment on a teacher. This is why there's warnings about being teachers. Beware the position that you find yourself in because of the responsibility for what you say. And if people follow what you say, you have a burden in that. You have a responsibility. So let's look at this from the point of view as he says, look, he says, they do not sleep. Who? The ones who are doing wrong and who are evildoers. So these are people that should know better. Let's take it from that perspective, because it's so easy to say, oh, it's the world and those outside. But what about those inside? We got wheat and tares together. We have to be careful that we're avoiding the path of the wrong and not walking the ways of the ones who are breaking commandments, let's call it, instead of evildoers. Avoid it, pass by it, turn away, pass on, for they do not sleep unless they've done evil, and their sleep is taken away unless they make someone fall. Do you not, well, I don't know how I want to say this. Have you not experienced people who seem like they cannot be happy until they get people to agree with them? and follow in the direction they're going? Have you not seen those people that seem to be relentlessly pushing and pushing, like there's no peace in them, there's no rest in them until they get others to follow them? And by follow them, I don't mean like in a position of leadership. By you taking the same doctrinal position as them is what I'm talking about. We are always most comfortable with people that are like us. So if you're in a position where you have taken a stance on something that's not like everybody else, that's more, let me rephrase that, that's less commonly taken, a position that's less commonly taken, you may tend to be one that will try to get others to find their way to your path, because you will be much happier not being on that path alone. And that's why some of you keep pushing some of your friends and family members, because you want them to be on this path, not just because you think it's right, because it will just make your life a lot easier and you'll be a lot happier if you're not the only one doing it. How many of you remember when you were the only one doing it that you knew, and how stressful and strange that was, and you were hoping to find others that were doing what you were believing you needed to be doing? But the thing was, you looked and you found others, as opposed to, any of you try to convince others to follow you? Probably some. Did it work out well? No. Okay? But you had this need to have other people walk with you. I know we are very independent as people at times, but there's a piece of us still that would rather not be by ourselves, not walk alone. We'd like to know that others are on the same path, on the same page. Look, as a teacher, if I ever go and speak anywhere, which I do very rarely, I will often get people coming up to me to ask questions that I know is their attempt to find out if the teacher or the guest speaker agrees with their position, so they can go tell everybody, hey, you know that thing I'm into? He agreed with me. That's what they're wanting to hear. They're looking for an endorsement. And this happens in every congregation, where somebody can come in, or someone could develop, for whatever reason, some sort of an idea or position that is not the commonly held position in the group, and now they're going to start pulling people off to the side when they get an opportunity to try to see if they can get you to have that same position. Now, that doesn't mean that they're wrong. Could be that the leadership's wrong. Could be the whole congregation's wrong. Doesn't matter. The point is, this is a warning that you could be, and be careful of what that looks like and what that could mean. So be reluctant to try to draw people to your position. Let Abba do the drawing. Let him do the convincing. Because you don't want to be in the group called, they do not sleep unless they have done evil, and their sleep is taken away unless they make someone fall, for they have eaten the bread of wrongdoing, and they drink the wine of violence. Okay, hold that spot there for a second. Turn to Ezekiel 22. I want to define from Scripture. So in Ezekiel 22, I want us to have a definition for violence here, because you're gonna read this in Proverbs thinking they drink the wine of violence. These are angry, violent people. Not necessarily. What's Yahweh mean when he says violence? Ezekiel 22, we'll go into verse 25. There's a conspiracy of her prophets in her midst, like a roaring lion, tearing the prey. They've devoured life. They have taken wealth and precious matters. They have made widows in her midst. Her priests have done violence to my teaching. Oh, maybe that's the kind of violence we're talking about. You step into that position of leadership as like becoming a priest, and you might be profaning the set-apart matters. He says, they have done violence to my teachings, and they profane my set-apart matters. They have not distinguished between the set-apart and profane, nor have they made known the difference between the unclean and the clean, and they have hidden their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned in their midst. Her leaders in her midst are like wolves tearing the prey, to shed blood, to destroy lives, and get greedy gain. And her prophets have coated them with whitewash, seeing a false vision, and divining a lie for them, saying, thus said the Master Yahweh, when Yahweh had not spoken. Now, let's fill in the blanks here. First of all, the priests have done violence to my teaching. They profane my set-apart matters. How do you do violence to a teaching? Well, when you take a teaching that he says and you bend it, twist it into something that it really doesn't say, that's doing violence to his teachings. That's profaning his set-apart matters. It's profane for you to manipulate, bend, or twist. By the way, the priests here, and also in verse 28, when they're divining the false vision and seeing the false vision, divining a lie, I promise you that they're not necessarily doing this knowingly. In other words, they're not knowingly trying to say a false vision or divine a lie. This is like the guys who come to Yeshua and say, Master, Master, we've done all this stuff in your name. I believe those people are genuine. They really believe they were doing the right thing. So let's be careful and not always, this is a problem I think for some of us, maybe for all of us at some point, where you think when you read these kind of things, it's talking about people who are doing things on purpose. And I don't think so. I don't think they are knowingly, purposely trying to screw everybody up or anybody up or to make something that's a lie or false and just put it out there. There may be some, I think it's very few. I think it's a lot of us that are bending and twisting things because of our own personal experiences and preferences. We're trying to have it look like and feel like and be what we want it to be because of us having our own me, I don't like, I prefer, I don't prefer, I wish it was this way. And then we start to find things that justify or allow us to go in the direction we want to go. And that's the problem. And so when that happens, we can be susceptible to doing violence to his word. Okay, let's take it back now to Proverbs. After we just read what we read here, listen to what it says in Proverbs. It says, they have eaten of the bread. Okay, what is bread metaphor? What's the metaphor of bread in Scripture? The word. So they've eaten of the word of wrongdoing. So they've eaten of something that they think is the word, but it's not exactly the word. So we have to be careful with that. And they have drank the wine, so this is like Kiddush and Motzi. This is the bread and the wine. You can see the metaphors that go back even to the Melchizedekian opportunity where you see Melchizedek and Abraham. Okay, the bread and the wine, all the way forward to Yeshua at the Last Supper with bread and wine. The metaphors for life in the blood and bread being the word or the instruction. He says they've eaten of the wrong instruction and they're drinking of the wrong life, the wrong blood. It's the wine of violence. So they think it brings life, but it doesn't bring life. So we are to avoid these people in these situations, and we are to be careful that we're not the ones actually doing what's going on here, that we're not doing it. He says, avoid it, do not pass by it, do not walk in the way of these people. That's in verse 14. Don't enter their path. He says, because they have eaten of the bread of wrongdoing and they drink of the wine of violence. So again, you could read through this. I certainly have done this in the past and think, oh, it's talking about those out in the world. It's talking about those that are violent people who are literally go out to doing things that we would think of, in the Peshat version of violence. But we have other definitions scripturally for that. These are people that are actively and probably not purposefully, in other words, they're not aware of what they're doing, taking the word and doing violence to the word, to the teachings, and then they're trying to get others involved, causing them to fall. Their intent is not to cause anybody to fall. They're like the ones who go to Yeshua and say, Master, Master, but we've done all these things in your name. We thought we were doing good. Let me tell you, I hear a lot of people out there very strongly promoting or advocating a position, very strongly attacking others' positions, and I promise you that most of them, I would believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I really believe they are mostly thinking they're doing the right thing. They really think that they are helping, and they think they're defending our Creator and His Word. And I'm not against that per se, but because the likelihood of you being wrong is high enough, you should be really reluctant to do that unless you are actually called to take on that burden of responsibility. Because it's really easy to be out there in the cheap seat, so to speak, and then put out what you want to put out. It's different when you actually take on the role and burden, knowing if people do what I say, I will be judged for that. Because you may not think that as you're commenting on somebody's post. And I'm talking about some of you know, either you are or you know people that are what I call Facebook trolls. They hang under the bridge waiting for someone to post something that they can attack and tell everybody how stupid and wrong they are. As soon as you do that, you are now open to the double judgment. You've stepped up into the position of teacher as you correct people. Oh, but they said something wrong. Really? Like you've never said anything wrong? Like you don't continuously on a regular basis say things that are wrong? So whose job is it then to correct you every time you open your mouth? Yes, they said something maybe that was wrong. Maybe you were even right. But is it your job or your role to set that straight? I have made a comment, and maybe I'm wrong, but I will say it again to you we'll call it counsel. Here's my counsel. Only correct those who you have a relationship with, who have opened up that relationship to the idea of you correcting them. I'll say it again. Only correct those who the nature of your relationship has an expectation that you have that opportunity to correct them. My children know I can correct them. Why? Because they're my children. Your children should not necessarily expect me to correct them. They're not my children. Do you see what I'm saying? There's an understanding of relationship. Even to the point where I've had to tell both sets of grandparents at one point or another, they're not your children, they're mine. You don't get to correct them when I'm standing right here. I had to do that for my parents and her parents. Because sometimes people don't understand the limitations of the relationship. Now, bear in mind, I expect somebody to correct my children if they have that relationship if I'm not there. But I'm standing right there. You need to allow me to do it. Now, on the same token, you may have a friendship with somebody where they have opened up that relationship too, where you can speak into their life and say, hey, because I have friends like this. I have other ministry people that I'm friends with who we have agreed equally to each other, hey, if you ever see anything I'm doing, or if I see something you're doing, we have agreed that either one of us is encouraged to grab a hold and say, excuse me, what in the world are you doing? Okay? But that is an agreed, you know what that is? That's a covenant. It's a relationship. We have agreed to have a relationship that has an expectation of things that we would do and not do. So why are you correcting people that you don't have a relationship that allows for that? Because a lot of people are being corrected on Facebook by people they've never met, never spoken to. A lot of times they're not even friends with them. They're just posting on the post because it's a public post. We should really build the relationships first. And don't worry, if they're wrong, Abba will bring someone with a relationship with those people into their lives to show them what they need to see. Just like he did for you. Just like he did for you. Or, now some of you did this through a relationship. Some of you found a teaching. Now, when you found that teaching, did you find a teaching that explained something, or did the teaching come to you and beat you up for being wrong? The teaching didn't come to you. It was just sitting there on the internet. You found it. You were led to it, hopefully, if that's the case. You found it, you watched it, and it made a difference. It's not because somebody, beat you over the head with it. Now, somebody may have said to you, hey, this thing we've been talking about, there's a teaching that covers that you may want to look at. That's a very gentle suggestion, not correction. Then you're allowing the teaching to be interpreted, received, and discerned by the person themselves as they watch it or they listen to it. So let's be careful that this is very strong wording in here about how we react and how we deal with other people. Within the body, I think, more than outside the body. The outside the body stuff, I think, should be pretty straightforward and obvious. If the people outside the body are doing things that are against Torah, you shouldn't be involving yourself very much in that. That doesn't mean you end every relationship with people that are not Torah observant, but if they're doing something actively and that's not Torah observant, you don't want to actively be with them while they're doing it. Hopefully that's simple and straightforward. But what about those in the body who seem pretty smart and pretty good? And by the way, this is where we end up in our naivete because we're new. And when we're new, anybody that's been in this 5 minutes longer than us, we think knows more than we do. Or if they sound like they know more than us, we think that, they're experts. And so we could be susceptible to their influence. And so we have to be very careful with that. And so they might not look to you like evildoers or doing violence or wrongdoing, etc., etc. But yet we have to have discernment. We have to be looking at it because this is a big issue here. He spends a bunch of verses talking about it. But then he gives us a contrast now then into verse 18. He says, but the path of the righteous is like the light of the dawn that shines ever brighter onto the perfect day. So it should be something that's increasing, that's growing. So it gets brighter and brighter, leading on to perfection. Now, perfection here, I believe, I didn't look the Hebrew up here, but it would be the idea of integrity. That is going to lead on to more and more levels of fullness of integrity. Okay? So the path of doing what's right. Righteousness or righteous is simply a word that has to do with doing what's right. And what's defined as right is defined by our Creator. Yahweh tells us what is right and what is wrong. And that if we're on that path, it should continuously illuminate and make brighter so that you can see more, so that you can walk more correctly. You know, in Psalms, it says, thy word is a lamp. Psalm 119, 105, verse 105, I believe. Thy word is a lamp. Okay, and a lamp doesn't necessarily cast light out very far. But as we're walking along the path, what if that light kept getting brighter and brighter? You could see more and more. So I believe that's what Shlomo is saying here, Solomon is saying here. And it shines ever brighter onto showing us the end of it, which is fullness of integrity and perfection as we become transformed to the image of Yeshua. The way of the wrong, however, is like darkness, verse 19. They do not know at what they stumble. So this is, again, a verse that I think endorses what I said a little bit earlier, which is they, the ones who, the wrong, are like darkness and they don't know at what they stumble. So there's an innocence here. There's an ignorance, but there's an innocence. In other words, it's not necessarily that they're doing this on purpose with malicious intent. They just happen to be in darkness, but they think they're in light. But they're in darkness and they do not know at what they stumble. So they're not recognizing that what's causing stumbling to others and also causing them to stumble is actually something that's causing anybody to stumble. They can't see it. All right? They can't see it. Those in darkness. Now, bear in mind that the walking in darkness is part of the curses of Deuteronomy 28, and we can see that in verse 29. So you can add that to your notes. 28, 29, and you shall be groping at noon as a blind man gropes in darkness and not prosper in your ways, and you shall be only oppressed and plundered all the days with no one to save you. So here we have this idea of groping around. But they're groping around not recognizing that they're blind. They don't understand and see that they're blind and that they are struggling because that's the spiritual level of blindness here. It's not a physical blindness. So they can't, it's like a child. You know when you work with a child, you sit there sometimes going, excuse me, daughter, excuse me, son. The problem is that you don't know yet what you don't know. I mean, that's what schooling is all about, is to help you in the education process, not necessarily to learn something, but to recognize how much you don't know. Part of the education process in coming into Torah is to recognize how much you don't know. The thing is, you always are going to have a part of the process where you still have things that you don't know that you don't know. You think you know, but you don't. And that's part of the brightening of the light and the revealing that he does is to show you more and more. How many things have you found out on a regular basis? Isn't it a regular basis that you find out there's things that you thought you knew that you really don't know? If that's not happening, you're missing something. You should be continuously finding things, maybe one thing here, one thing there. Maybe it's not like at the beginning, it was hundreds of things. Some of you at the beginning were like, oh man, did we not have anything right? Anybody ever have that thought? Like, did we not have anything right? No, you had some things right. Not many maybe, but you had some things right. You knew that there was a father and there was a son. That was right. Maybe you didn't understand them in the right context. You knew that the son died for you and provided the means of salvation. So the things that you knew, but there's so much that was not right. But over time, you would come to discover more and more things that you thought were one way, come to find out it really wasn't true. It was wrong. It was not the correct way of seeing it. And so here that idea is being expressed in Proverbs, but it goes back to Deuteronomy 28:29, this groping around, but we're groping around in a way that really feels like we think we know what we're doing, but we don't realize how much we don't know. Let's continue here. But the point being is this, that there are parts of Scripture, and we see it in the New Testament in the verses that I can't find, have to do with the idea of being in our own delusional mind, where we think that we're right and we're wrong, that he's allowed us to be in a delusion. That's not the verse I was looking for specifically, but verses that have to do with that, and how in that place he called us out and opened up our mind, and he showed us what we needed to see. But we have to understand that at that time, we thought we were right. We didn't think anything that we were doing was wrong. And so it was a life-changing, what's the word I'm looking for? Destabilizing, like your whole life got thrown into a spin when you first realized just how much was wrong. And it's a little scary, and it's a little upsetting, and all kinds of other, negative and strong emotions when you realize just how much we've been lied to and misrepresented of the truth. The truth has been misrepresented so much. And yet when we were there, we did it with all our heart and with all our mind, and we did it the best we could, many of us. So recognize that what he's talking about here is, look, you have to recognize that there are those that are out there that are going to be throwing it out there hard and strong and fast and wrong. But you may not be able to recognize right away that it's wrong. So before you start buying into it, and worse than that, sharing it and pushing it forward and joining that parade, you may want to just sit back and be sure to spend a little bit more time making sure you haven't caught a side path or a wrong path. Because the way that leads to the kingdom and the ways that goes in other directions look very similar to you at first. They will look very similar to you at first. And so it takes some time to discern which is which. And sometimes you got to jump off one and jump to another one to realize, oh, that was a dead end. Anybody make a few choices off of some dead ends? Okay? And so if you have, it's like playing the game that we play often, the have you ever been wrong game. Okay, we all know we've been wrong. We all know that we will be wrong again in the future. And we all know that the times in the past, there have been many of them when we were wrong, that, man, we were ready to bet the house, bet our lives that we were right and we were still wrong. That being the case, we should recognize that there will be in the future things that we were so strong about that we might be wrong about. So be much more circumspect and reluctant to just go out there throwing things out in the public. Unless you're ready to be wrong and shamed and embarrassed, etc. And also take on the responsibility for people who bought into what you said. And I'm not talking about teachers necessarily. I'm talking about every one of you who could be sitting in a conversation with a friend and just all of a sudden you shift into the role where they're listening and you're teaching and you don't even realize that's happened. And you're giving them guidance about a position and you're helping to change their mind to go in a different direction. I'm not saying never do that. I'm saying recognize that that is a dangerous moment that could either bless and go very well, or you could cause someone to stumble and fall. And so you have to be clear. That's why I have always encouraged that it would be much safer for you to send them to a teaching. Hey, this teaching over here, I think, answers the question well. Then you put the burden on the teacher. Let the teacher do it. And in case you ever get to sit here with me like all day long on any one day and you hear me take phone calls, you will hear that I don't even answer questions if I have a teaching on it. Now, it's still me doing the teaching, but I will send them to the place where they can get the thorough answer and not just give it to them on the phone in 10 minutes. Unless it really is something you can answer in 10 minutes. I will tell them, listen, you need to go listen to this and this, and then if you still have questions, you can call me. I still send people, because in case you're wondering if I do what I'm telling you to do, absolutely I do. Some of you know that because you've asked me and I've sent you to the teachings. You've asked me questions. I said, hey, great question. Go listen to this first. And if you still have a question, call me. That's the safety. Because the way of the wrong is like being in darkness, but not just darkness where they recognize they're in darkness. Remember, this is all going to the path of they're eating this bread, they're drinking of this wine. They think they're getting it. They have no idea that they're in darkness. Did you know how much darkness you were in before he opened your eyes and your ears? You had no idea. Guess what? There are people still in the body that don't know how much they still don't know. And they're being taught by people who've been doing this so short that they have no idea what they don't know. And I'm going to stand up here in front of you, and I've been doing this longer than most of them, and I still don't know a lot of things that I don't know. Because I don't think we ever get to the end of that until the kingdom, where we're continuously growing in grace and knowledge of our Elohim. We're learning, we're experiencing. The light is getting brighter that is shining on the path. So we should always be in that expectation that there's always things that you think you know, but you really don't know. That you're pretty sure about or maybe very sure about, and you can still be wrong about. We have to stay in that humble place. What does this have to do with covenanting? If you're not covenanting that without this approach, you're going to bend and twist it into your own image, and you're not going to understand what you signed on for. There are people that will misrepresent the idea of covenant. They'll misrepresent the actual covenant and twist it into something that it actually is not saying. And so remember, this is all about how we approach the relationship called covenant. We have to approach it in understanding how the righteousness lights up the path, and the wrongdoing is like being in darkness, but how they both can look similar to those who are not having it revealed to them yet. They're still in that place where they're thinking they're right when they're wrong. I'll give you an example with me. I did a teaching years and years ago called The Search for the Doctrine of Grace. And the point of that teaching back then was to demonstrate that this whole idea of a doctrine of grace was all Paulian. In other words, almost nobody else talks about it anywhere in Scripture but Paul, and he doesn't, even then he's not talking about it as a doctrine. So it's all about whether or not grace was a doctrine. But all in that teaching, I had no doubt at that time that grace was unmerited favor. Because it wasn't about what grace was when I did that teaching. It was about trying to show that it's not a doctrine, because after all, Christianity today makes it very clear we're under this doctrine called grace now, not the law. And I challenge anybody to show me it anywhere as a doctrine. Yeshua certainly never mentions it or talks about it. Peter, John, James, none of them do. Paul talks a lot about grace, but you have to understand, is it a doctrine or not? But then in doing the teaching again, to remake the teaching, I was shown some light on something that I did not see before. And we came to do a deeper understanding of what grace actually is. Because remember, the original teaching had nothing to do with what grace was. It just had to do with who was talking about it. That's all that the issue was. It's just to show that why is it that something that nobody else talks about in any kind of way all of a sudden is the dominant theme of Christianity because one guy decided to talk about it. And I'm not against Paul. I'm just saying. Almost everything that is mentioned by him that has to do with grace. Now, that being said, when we went to put the study together, Yahweh took the Holy Spirit and ripped into me and said, oh, by the way, you might want to figure out what grace really is. And then we came to realize we had that upside down and backwards. That it was merited favor, not unmerited favor. That somewhere in Christianity, they'd taken the idea of mercy and this idea of favor and mixed them together. And so mercy is something that's given because you don't deserve it, but because the person loves you and they're going to show mercy on you. And so they've been mixed together. Now, I'm not saying that to start a whole thing on a separate teaching there. Go listen to the 14 parts of that, and you'll listen to the whole explanation of where we came out with that. But my point being, I'm using me as an example. Almost 17 or 18 years ago, I did a teaching originally called The Search for the Doctrine of Grace. You guys have never heard it. It's never been out there since that long ago, unless somebody has an old tape of it. And it was a one-part teaching designed to kind of show that piece. Then, in readdressing the issue, because I felt like we had to have all of the basic key elements addressed in this second round of ministry, we'll call it, when I started 7 years ago or 8 years ago. And in that, we said that grace is a very important thing to go and bring out, and that's where that light got to shine. But up to that point, I thought I understood. See, I didn't know I was in darkness on that point. Just like all of you, I'm no different than you. I have the same experiences. Thought I understood something, thought I was right about something, thought I had it all under control, only to say, oops. How many of you are going to be shocked When Yeshua shows up, sets it all straight, sitting on the throne, when some of the things he says, you go, what? No, that can't be it. I've done this the other way for all these years. See, anybody believe that that's not going to happen? It's going to happen. There's going to be at least one or two things he's going to say in the way we do it or the way we approach it, the way we understand it, that is going to be completely showing us that we didn't get it. And that's going to happen. And by the way, it happens to you weekly, monthly, right now. He's doing it. You know, be careful you think you stand, lest you fall, right? So here he's trying to give us that comparison between righteous walk and the wrong walk or the evil walk. And he's trying to encourage you that if you see people walking in a direction that doesn't look exactly right to you, don't judge it, don't attack it, walk past it. Don't involve yourself. Now, it may be that they're right and you're wrong. If that's true, he'll show you. But let him do that showing and discerning. But at the moment, walk it with integrity. I think what he wants us to do more than anything else is walk with integrity with what you know. You need to walk with integrity. You do not need to walk out. Philippians 2:12 says you need to walk out your own salvation, not mine. I think that means that you walk with the fullness of effort and integrity in as much as you understand, you do it the best you can. You do it the best you can. Not you make others do it the best they can. You do it the best you can. And so maybe in your walk where you are right now, doing it the best you can, that little group off to the side over here looks to you like they're doing it different and wrong. Fine, stay away from it for right now. He'll reveal to you if they're right and you're wrong, and then maybe you'll have to go in that direction. But in the meantime, you'll avoid a bunch of them that you don't need to be involved with, and it will shake your integrity of what you're doing, and it may even cause you to stumble so much that you end up out of the covenant completely. Because you get frustrated, disillusioned, or whatever it is. All of you probably know people that have come from Christianity into this and gone straight into Judaism full on. That's because they didn't know what they didn't know. And because they discovered that there were things that they didn't know that they couldn't figure out answers for, they went over the bridge and crossed into full-on Judaism. Because they couldn't answer questions like Isaiah 41, 43, 45, where there are verses that are very challenging that the Father and the Son teachings clarifies it completely. And the reason I did that teaching was to help address that problem. So if you're not sure, listen to the teaching, do you know the Father and the Son? But to understand that that's going on right here in chapter 4 of Proverbs is understanding that there are those that with full integrity, doing it as hard as they can cause you to stumble, to come into a different direction. Even if they're not actively doing it. You got to be very careful with that. See, you know what it looks like sometimes? I'll tell you what it looks like sometimes, and I won't name names here, but there are a few teachers out there that are really, really smart, really, really knowledgeable. They know the Old Testament and the New, but they deny Yeshua. And some of you are thinking, well, they're so much smarter than me. One of us is wrong. It's probably me. Because after all, they know the book better than I do. They've researched more. They're scholarly, blah, blah, blah. And so you, not trusting in what Yahweh's doing with you, feel inadequate, not up to the challenge, etc. And so you say, well, they must be right, I must be wrong after all, because they're so smart. But the scholarly is not who he's calling here necessarily. In other words, you don't need to be scholarly to understand this stuff. But he is calling you to have trust in him and to find the anointed appointed teachers. By the way, anointed appointed teachers, if you're listening to Paul, are those that believe in Yeshua. Ephesians 4 is not talking about those who don't believe in Yeshua. So why are we running around following all these teachers that reject Yeshua? And then wonder why we end up in Judaism and end up leaving this. It happens, though, all the time. We had people leave here because they thought that I was going to be leading people into Talmudic Judaism. I have never even hinted that that would be a possibility in all the 20 years that I've been doing this. Not once. I come from that background somewhat. When I say somewhat, meaning I was more of a secular Jew, a cultural Jew. But the background was I was with a community of people that did Talmudic Judaism. And I knew before I ever came into any belief system, because I was, again, more cultural than religious in any sort of form, I knew that I didn't want that mess. And so we're never going there. Of course, that really got somebody upset who thought for sure we were going there. It's like, why? Everything we need is in this book right here. You can use other books if you want for other things, but everything you need is in this book right here. And when Paul talks about needing teachers, he's talking about Messiah-believing teachers. Torah observant, Torah knowledgeable, Messiah-believing teachers. That's what he wants you to go look for. So be careful with that. Now, when he's talking about Messiah-believing teachers, don't forget the teaching, beware false prophets. We're talking about those who believe in Yeshua and how we understand Yeshua, not the Christianized Messiah thing, a version called Jesus. And if you have no idea what I just said, you need to listen to the teaching, beware false prophets. Because if I took you out of the middle of like outer nowhere land, where you have never been heard of a Bible, never heard of Christianity, never heard of Judaism, never heard of anything scriptural, and I presented you with Yeshua, the way we teach Yeshua from the scripture, and the way Christianity presents Jesus, you would think we're talking about two different people. You cannot tell me that's not true. If you are telling me that's not true, you're lying to yourself. So it's not enough to find someone who believes in the personification of Messiah that has been labeled with the Jesus name, where the law has been done away with, and we're all under this weird thing called grace, the way Christianity has done it, and whatever, okay? You need a Torah-believing, Torah-submissive teacher that believes in Yeshua, the embodiment, the walking, talking, living Torah. The Torah made flesh, as Daniel would say. Okay? Our Daniel, who has that ministry. All right, Torah made flesh. That's the teachers you need to be looking for, because they are actually teaching you the covenant as renewed and explained to us in the new covenant. The covenant at Sinai, which by the way still was with Yeshua, go listen to the Father and Son teaching, is going to be renewed with Yeshua. Let's be careful with all this. The way of the wrong is like darkness. They do not know it, what they stumble. Verse 19. Verse 20. My son, listen to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not depart from your eyes. Guard them in the midst of your heart. For they are life to those who find them and healing to all their flesh. He wants you to listen. Shema. Yes, right? He wants you to hear and listen. He wants you to listen to the words, but then he always does this beautiful thing. At least I think it's beautiful. He reminds you about your part in it. Incline your ear. That is an active thing that you do. He doesn't do it for you. See, I'm speaking. You don't have to incline your ear to listen. Yeah, the sound will pass over you and might go in your ear, go out the other, whatever. But to listen in an active way, you have to incline your ear. So Yahweh says, through Solomon here, I believe this is a representation, he says to his children, my son, my children, listen actively to my words and incline your ear. Take the role of you disciplining yourself. That's back to, verse 13, hold fast to discipline. Discipline yourself and actually pay attention, listen, process, understand, see the wisdom in it, then the knowledge, the relationship of it, and then apply it. Incline your ears. Let them not depart, these things that I'm saying, from before your eyes. They shall be as frontlets before your eyes, from the Ve'ahavta, Deuteronomy, right? Chapter 6. And so you see where it says they should be as frontlets, but he says, don't let them depart from your eyes. Depart from your eyes. Depart from your eyes. Okay, so what is he trying to say here? You should be seeing the world through his sayings. You should be seeing the world through his wisdom. You should be seeing the world through the Torah. That's a different way of thinking about it. Are you seeing things through the filter of his word? Because if you are, then when you look at something that you shouldn't be doing, you go, I'm looking at it, I'm filtering it, nope. I'm looking at it, filtering it, yep. Sorry, that doesn't mean you guys are nope and you guys are yup, okay, just don't get insulted. Okay, we'll look over here and say, we're looking through it, yep, nope. Okay. But you're filtering through, okay? You're looking at stuff that's going on where you could be involved or not involved, and you're looking through the filter of his word, the wisdom, the understanding, and the knowledge that you should have, and then you're guarding that information, those sayings, that instruction, you're guarding them in the midst of your heart. Another active word for you to do that he's not going to do for you. You have to guard this stuff in your heart. You've got to do it. He's not doing it for you. See, remember, we're coming out from under a slavery of freedom. Doesn't that sound weird? Because you became slaves to sin because you were set free to do whatever you wanted. And you got to recognize, because in that system that you came out of, in the system you came out of, you were told that whatever was good, whatever you needed would be done for you by Messiah. You didn't have to do anything. That's really what you were told, essentially. But here he keeps telling you, you need to incline your ears. You need to guard in your heart, which means also in other verses it takes to lay up these words in your heart. So first of all, it goes from your ear, and then you have to consciously take it and put it in your heart, and then you have to guard. Now that laying up is not in this verse, but it's in other verses that we get to read. Listen to the heart of the matter teaching. You see it all over the place. The idea that you have to actively choose to lay up these words and place them in your heart and then guard them. For they are life to those who find them. The words are life. You know, we have places where we read the verse that says, the words that I speak are life. The word is life. Yeshua is life. Yeshua is the word, the living, talking, walking word. He says, I am the way, the truth, and life. What's the way? Torah is the way. He's the way. He's Torah. He is life. He is light. He is truth. He says, for they are life to those who find them and healing to all their flesh. The cure for everything that ails you is through this process. That doesn't mean that you will actually be healed in this world. But it'll bring you the shalom and peace to go through it so that you can be where you're supposed to be at the end, when there will be no more suffering and no more pain. And you get a restored, not even a restored, you get a new incorruptible body. That's the healing. He says, watch over your heart with all diligence. Oh, that's so much work. That sounds too hard. Forget it. I have to put all diligence into this? Now he says, watch over your heart with all diligence. What's he worried about here? Oh, but I don't like doing that. Oh, I don't want to do that. Well, why? But I want to do this, and I like that. Watch over your heart. That's the preferences problem. But I don't want to do that. But I like this. Why can't I do that? It's your preferences, your desires. He says, watch over with all diligence. Make sure that the filter in the midst of your heart that's anchoring everything is this wisdom. The wisdom of Yah, the wisdom from above. For out of it are the sources of life. So the sources of life. So you don't have life now and you want life? Guess what? The source of it is to start walking out the covenant. Because the Torah, when we talk about the Torah, we're talking about the covenantal document, the covenantal information, the covenantal relationship is based on an agreement to do what he says to do. We call that Torah, the teachings and instructions of Yah. He says, for out of that, out of the Torah, is the source of life. Yeshua says, I am the life, right? I am the truth, the way, and life. So, but he's also the Torah. He says, if you eat of my flesh, you will live. So what's his flesh? The word, the Torah. Turn away from you a crooked mouth and put perverse lips far from you. So now he's talking about you now. He's not talking about other people. You need to be careful of your crooked mouth. So when he talks about crooked and perverse in this conversation here, this one little verse, what is he talking about? Spin. He doesn't want you spinning the word. Perverse means to pervert, to twist, to alter from what it's originally intended to be done because you wanted to say something else. It's the crooked, bending, twisting of the word. And we do it with our mouth and with our lips. He says, turn away from that. Avoid, stop, guard against you taking his word and twisting it to your own destruction, really. Oh, wait a minute. There's a part in 2 Peter that says that happens with Paul's teachings as well as all the rest of the scripture, where people who are unstable and unlearned, maybe we need to look at that. People only look at this verse, I think, because they want to defend Paul's writings and explain why they're hard to understand. But let's look at it from a different point of view. Okay? Let's go to 2 Peter 3:16, right? It says here, let's go to verse 14. So then, beloved ones, wait, let me write this down. We went to another place, right? So, 2 Kepha 3. Okay. So then, beloved ones, looking forward to this, do your utmost to be found by him in peace, spotless and blameless. Oh, to be found in peace. You mean not like those who are having problems sleeping because they can't have peace because they're busy running around in wrong directions and needing everybody to be on their side? He says, no, I want you to be doing your utmost to be at peace and spotless and blameless, and reckon the patience of our master as deliverance, as also our beloved brother Shaul wrote to you according to the wisdom given to him. As also in all his letters, speaking in them concerning these matters in which some are hard to understand, which those who are untaught and unstable twist to their own destruction, as they do also the other scriptures. So you then, beloved ones, be forewarned. Watch, lest you also fall from your own steadfastness, being led away with the delusion of lawlessness. So here he's saying, look, if you are not taught correctly, if you're not actually trained and taught, and you're unstable, you could twist the word, and in twisting it, what you end up with is in a delusion of thinking you're right when you're actually in lawlessness. That's back to master, master, we did all this in your name. And he said, no. You thought you did. You thought I was behind it all. You thought I was in agreement with you, but you were doing lawlessness. But they didn't think they were. He says, oh no, be forewarned. Now, what does it mean then to be taught and stable? How does one become taught and stable? What amount of instruction and study qualifies you to be taught and stable? And by the way, maybe I'm wrong here. We do have a teaching called Learn and Teach the Torah, which I need to redo, so we'll redo that at some point, hopefully this year. But to be taught, I think, implies there being a teacher. So if you're untaught, maybe you're someone without a teacher. And maybe that makes you more susceptible to twist the scriptures to your own destruction. And others, which fits into Proverbs 4, when you're warned against this stuff. Because he says the untaught, those without a teacher, those without an Ephesians 4 teacher, they're unstable. How many of you have noticed that those that are uncovered, when you talk to them over a period of time, you notice a lack of stability? They change, they drift, they fly from doctrine to doctrine, position to position. Anybody notice that? You see the unstableness of that. They are the unstable. And they're untaught. To be taught, you need a teacher. Oh, but we got the Ruach teaching us. Really? So is the Ruach confused? Because if the Ruach's teaching everybody that's claiming that, that's a problem. Because I can promise you, everybody that you find, go out there and find 5, 6, 8 people that claim they're being taught by the Ruach and see if they all agree with each other. Matter of fact, just find 2 and see if they agree with each other. I don't think so. So no, the Ruach is not the one doing all the teaching. The Ruach is teaching, hopefully through the anointed, appointed teachers. Your job is to go find one of those. And then the Ruach in you is helping you recognize that. Go to the teaching called Understanding the Ruach, if you're confused about that. But notice that when it talks about this, they're being led away by the delusion that they're being lawful when they're being lawless. That's what I think that delusion is. They're not delusional thinking breaking the law is going to be my ticket to success here. Now, they could be buying into the delusion that the law has been done away with. It's nailed to the cross. We don't need it anymore. And so, therefore, they're doing lawlessness thinking it's okay. The law says don't eat pork. Oh, but I love pork. The law says a lot of things that, well, if it's done away with, well, then we just do whatever we want. We got to be careful with that. Because otherwise we become untaught and unstable. Or actually we demonstrate and recognize, we should recognize that we are already experiencing the problems of being untaught and unstable. I'm going to say this as strong as I can. If you have not yet, you need to find yourself a teacher. If it's me, great. If it's not, fine. Go find one. For all those you think that I'm out there thinking that everybody has to follow me, that's not true. You need to find a teacher. If it's me, that's great. If it's not, that's great. You got to walk out your own salvation. If you like Paul, Paul tells you that those guys, Ephesians chapter 4, and maybe I just got to read it real quickly, says that you need them for the perfecting of the set-apart ones, 4:12, to the work of service, to a building up of the body of Messiah, until we all come to the unity of the belief and of the knowledge or relationship of the Son of Elohim, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the completeness of Messiah, so that we should no longer be children tossed and borne about by every wind of teaching, by trickery of men and cleverness. Oh, wait a minute. There's winds of teaching that's not coming from the teachers he's talking about when he's talking about the fivefold ministry. Verse 11, he's talking about those anointed, appointed teachers, not just anybody claiming to be a teacher. Because verse 11, he says, he gave some to be emissaries, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. Now, if Paul's telling the truth, and everybody here hopefully does recognize Paul as a person who belongs in this book and has his teachings here anointed and appointed to be for you to read, he believes that we need these people because they're there to help us be perfected into the work of service and the building up the body until we come into the full measure and stature of Messiah Yeshua himself. Are we there yet? Then we still need teachers. We're not there yet. But we don't just need anybody being a teacher, because it says if you don't have these teachers, these fivefold ministry guys, you could be children that are tossed about and borne about by the wind and teachings and trickery and cleverness and everything else. And cleverness is in there because you know what? There's a lot of teachings out there that are very thoroughly put together and very thoroughly wrong. Oh, but they're thorough and impressive. You've heard a lot of them, and some of you bought into a lot of them, and now you're coming out of them. And by the way, that person is not cleverly, purposely trying to screw you up. They are under the delusion that they're right. A lot of them are self-appointed, self-anointed, and they just think they're right. They're not thinking that they're messing up anybody. They think they're helping. Okay, here it is, the verse I wanted, thank you. The verse I was looking for earlier. Let's go back down now to verse 17. So this I say, witness in the master, that you should no longer walk as Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having been darkened in their understanding, having been estranged from the life of Elohim, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. That's the verse I was looking for. Remember, we're talking about how there was this delusion and we have our mindset, but I wasn't wanting those verses with that wording. I wanted this futility of our mind as we're walking like Gentiles, thinking we could choose for ourselves and that we know what we're doing. Gentiles are who? Who are the Gentiles? Everybody not in covenant. Make it simple. I don't care what you were born. I don't care if you were Jewish. I don't care if you were Israelite by birth. Everybody not in covenant is called Gentile. They are outside the camp. Okay? There are covenanted Israelites and Gentiles. Israelites that are not covenanted are considered Gentiles. Paul explains this, where he says that the circumcision, when you act like an uncircumcised, makes you uncircumcised. That your circumcision availed you nothing. So you think you're covenanted because you had snip, snip, snip. Good. But you're not doing anything. So that didn't help you at all. Right? So the verse I was looking for, thank you. I'm glad that we ended up here in Ephesians 4 because that's where I was looking for. I knew it was at the bottom of the page on the right here, but I just couldn't find the right chapter. Okay? We have to be careful that we are no longer walking as those uncovenanted people walk. In the futility of their mind. And what do I mean the futility of their mind? What's futile? Thinking that you're doing it right when you're doing it wrong. Putting all that effort into doing it in a way that doesn't actually work. But in their minds, they're right. Because they've been darkened in their understanding. They've been estranged from the life, the way, the truth, the life, the word, Yeshua, the Torah, because of ignorance that is in them. So how do you fix a problem of ignorance? Education, right? What cures ignorance? Instruction. Find that teacher from verse 11 and take the ignorance away. Allow the teacher to help you figure out how to come out of that darkness, connect up so you're no longer estranged from Elohim. By the way, what estranges you from Elohim? Torah breaking. So in the futility of their mind, they thought they had a relationship they didn't have. Do you have a relationship you really don't have? You may want to ask that question. What did I say, Manny, remember? What did I say that it's not, it's Yahweh that gets to decide whether or not you have a relationship with him, not you? Okay? You don't get to decide that you have a relationship with him, he does. But a lot of you walk around going, oh, we are so close and I've got such a great relationship with my Messiah. A lot of you thought that when you were Christians. You don't get to decide that, he does. He decides what are the terms of the relationship. Let me ask you a question. Some of you may be, I don't want you to raise hands, but do you remember when you were younger, a lot of you adults, and you liked somebody a lot, and they didn't like you the same, but in your mind you had a relationship with them? Anybody have one of those? When you were a younger kid, and you thought, oh, he likes me, she likes me, oh, that's my boyfriend, that's my girlfriend, and they're looking at you like, what? So you don't get to decide whether or not you have a relationship with somebody, they do. And so that's something that, the futility of your mind. So are we walking in the futility of our mind as Gentiles still? Or are we covenanted Israelites walking in the clarity of our mind, having the light shine of righteousness because we are guarding over and submitting to the wisdom and the instruction that's coming from above? We're listening, we're inclining our ears, and we're putting in the midst of our heart that which we need so that we're no longer walking as Gentiles walk in the futility of the mind because we have a darkening of our understanding. Darkening. What's the darkening? Go back to Deuteronomy. Groping around like it's midday when you're blind. All those in Christianity have been given a darkened understanding because they're told that the Torah, the thing that leads to life, that's what Yeshua, the living Torah, teaches us, has been done away with. And it's not their fault. They have not had their eyes opened yet, but the system, which has been on purpose, that system is there to keep them in the darkness. Go listen to Beware False Prophets. You need to understand. Okay, so hopefully we're getting this. So I'm glad that I turned to, instead of just quoting Ephesians 4, because that's where the verse was I was looking for earlier. Okay, so now I got to add that 17 and 18. Okay. See, why do I need to write notes before teaching? Once I'm teaching, I can write the notes after. It's not the normal way to do things, but anyway. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up with this. Actually, I'm going to read something as we pray. Father, I'm going to pray these verses here that Paul was writing at the beginning of chapter 4. He says, Father, I would ask that you would help us to walk worthily of the calling with which you have called us, with all humility and meekness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, and being eager to guard the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. One body, one Spirit, as you also were called in one expectation of our calling. So Father, this is where we need to be. And so, Father, help us to come out of the futility of our minds, the darkening of our understanding, the walking around in confusion and delusion, to walk in the light of the truth of righteousness that is in Yeshua Messiah, that he shows us through the Ruach HaKodesh. So, Father, we come to you asking that you would help us to embrace what's in your word so that we could take it and walk in it and embrace it, and so that it can become a part of us as we listen and incline our ears and guard over what you would have us to understand. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for those that you've sent before us that have taken that word and put it into writing for us. Thank you for the anointed, appointed positions and the teachers, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and all those that are out there that you have called to help us in our walk, the apostles. And Father, help us to find those that you have put in place so that we can truly be coming out of our ignorance, so we can no longer be untaught, but that we can be taught and instructed through them by you. And so, Father, that way we can no longer be unstable, but become stable and no longer twist your word to our own destruction. So, Father, we thank you. We praise you. We give you all glory and all honor as we come to you in the name of Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Amen.